The Eye live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind. Saturday, I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance. The fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
All right, good day wherever you are in this world. I hope you're having a great day here listening to Revolution Radio. Everybody asks for this. Revolution Radio. Where the information never sleeps. All right, thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Revising Reality with your host, Tim Kaiser, and my friend, Steve Gilmore. This is on Revolution Radio, where freedom never sleeps. The station needs all the donations it can get, and we're go for talking about Atlantis today.
Well, that's a good topic.
I think so. I think we had discussed the idea of talking about Atlantis this last time. So, I was just thinking about all kinds of things leading up to Atlantis, leading up to the show, because there's so much to discover. And I think you told me I lived a past life there, actually.
Yes, a lot of people that are connected with me seem to have emanated from there at some point. But I think there's a lot of, I won't say misinformation and disinformation. I think there's a lot of confusion about Atlantis out there generally, that people have been given snippets of information from disparate sources. And so there's no real clear picture of what Atlantis represents. So perhaps, with your permission, I can just explain the fundamentals of Atlantis.
Please do. I think that would be a great thing for our audience. I think that's right where we need to be. Okay,
so essentially Atlantis, the time clock of Atlantis began around 35,000 BC on Earth. So prior to 35,000 BC, so that's 37,000 years ago, there was no Atlantis.
All right.
So
that makes sense, though, because everything had to start.
Yes, a lot of people think that Atlantis is a sort of progression that's been here for all time. You know, it's a mythical period which disappeared, but it was there for all time on Earth, and that's just simply not true.
Yes, actually, I've known that myself, that it had its rise and fall, and that what is one of the reasons why there's so much confusion surrounding it is the timeline wars too, because Atlantis is definitely heavily involved currently in the timeline wars. There's a breakaway civilization of Atlanteans, so breakaway Earth. So you can't count them out, I guess, necessarily.
Well, there are actually multiple breakaway Atlantis civilizations. It's actually a reptilian one. So it's a popular motif because obviously it was very, very successful. And so anything that's successful is reused. People when I've spoken publicly here in Australia, people have asked me questions like, so this Baal character, or sometimes called Baal, who is he? And I've responded, well, he's actually many different things because you have to understand the meaning of the term, and that then term is applied to describe something. So Baal appears in many formats. Many entities have been called Baal. Baal is almost just figurative. And in some ways, Atlantis has taken that vestige as well. It has become a vestige. So if we look at the history, real-time history of Atlantis, it was formed out of necessity. It was created on Earth 35,000 BC or thereabouts. Prior to that, Atlantis was on Mars.
Really? Now that's something that nobody knows.
Right. Well, actually, not nobody, but not many people know. There are some that do. And I estimate that Atlantis is actually even on Mars. It was only around for about 70,000 years, maybe the 100 or 110,000 BC. Actually, it might have been before. No, it would have been before. So let me just explain the history of Mars. So it would have been significantly before that, actually. There was a cosmic war over Earth, and that ran from 102 to 120,000 BC. So I'm using these very rough date terms. It's the 18,000 years war. I might be slightly wrong. It might have been not 102. It might have been 101 and 119. But I like to round figures. So it was around that sort of period. Prior to that, and this may surprise you and audience members, the human genome had only just been created by about 5,000 years. So in actual fact, our genome, contrary to science opinion, is 125,000 years old.
Yeah, I think you might have mentioned that on our last show a little bit.
Yes.
That's extremely surprising to most people because, you'd think we were a lot older, but we have a lot older elements to us.
Right.
But we don't but we're not that old. We're, as a species,
right,
sort of in our infancy, perhaps.
Right. The components, what we're made of, stretches back billions of years. But us, as an entity group, are fairly new. So 125,000 years old. The biblical Genesis gives some insight into the problems of our creation. It says God was angry. And ultimately, it meant that our safety was jeopardized. And as far as I can ascertain, an entity group, and I mentioned them last time, called the Syrians, intervened just prior to the cosmic war and removed us from Earth away from the problem. And that's when we moved to the surface of Mars with them. Now, whether they took us to Mars and that was the start of Atlantis is open to debate. But I would have thought they'd have probably settled there first and moved us back. Now, one of the reasons it surprises me that Mars was resettled at all was there was a massive which we discussed last time, the fallout of Moldek last time, if you remember, 65 million years ago, that decimated the surface of Mars. It killed everything. Nothing survived on Mars. And it was really sort of treated as a shrine, So nobody would go to the surface of Mars because it was in the memory of the fallen. However, time's a great healer. So I think that obviously after all that time, it was okay. It was deemed okay, so they could resettle after millions and millions and millions of years.
Yeah.
So we were taken over to Mars and lived on Mars very peacefully, or peaceably, I understand. I've been told by, not through my inherent sources, but actually somebody I've met in Australia, that the houses had no doors or windows. So they were open because it had a temperate climate. You didn't actually need to wear clothes. You wouldn't get cold. The doors and the windows were open, and there was no need for security at all. So in the houses, I question that. I wonder all of the insects. I mean, they must have been dreadful, but maybe they didn't have so many insects then. Think about the mosquitoes. Try to get those out. Unless they put something in place of the windows, there was some sort of force. There was some sort of shield which could keep the insects out. They had different technologies then. So and I know that there was a reptilian, very placid reptilian entity that used to live with us on Mars as well. Very, very gentle, very, very nice. Different to the sort of Draco-style mercenaries we have that ghost Earth. And are very occasionally seen coming out of caves up to the surface. So so we lived on Mars under Syrian, the alien Syrian spiritual administration. So what happened was there was a comet that came heading towards Mars, and it struck apparently, and it knocked 90% of the atmosphere off the surface. And that was about 2,000 years before the move to Earth. So somehow they managed to create some kind of blister field. So there was an atmosphere, a breathable atmosphere that could be used. But obviously it wasn't the best of circumstances. But they couldn't relocate to Earth because at that point, the threat that had been there against us was still there, which was the Anunnaki.
Yeah.
So the Anunnaki, and it talks about this in the ancient Babylonian texts, where it talks about the Anunnaki caused this great flood, which actually ran from where the Atlantic Ocean is today, or it consumed half of Africa and went all the way up to the Caspian Sea, in Russia. So that became an ocean a very long time ago. It's obviously all changed now. And that was caused by the Anunnaki when they left. Now, I speculate that the Anunnaki actually ascended. The attempt to destroy man was unfair. That was an unfair accusation, in my opinion. It was just that happened, and it turned out that all the gargantuan apes, which, according to guys like Michael Tellinger, actually were 80 feet high or 20 meters tall. These great giant Neanderthal apes were all in that southern Africa region. So they would have perished by the flood. So it does make sense. So I don't think actually that also the chatter of man was we didn't annoy the Anunnaki. It was actually the gargantuan apes, and they were wiped out by the floodwaters that were caused by the Anunnaki. But it was an accident rather than a deliberate attack, in my opinion. And it was only after those floodwaters had subsided to a large degree that the Syrians took a trip out to Earth to see whether it would be safe and see whether they could broker arrangements for new settlement. So are you still with me?
Yes, I'm still with you.
Okay, good. So you're still following. So that's good. So they did eventually come with us, the whole lot of us, back to Earth. If you look at the history of fossils of remains of humans, you'll see that they begin around that 35,000 BC. They're very rare, actually, from that date, but they do begin around then, and that is really the start of humans on Earth. There are some earlier fossils, but I can explain that. I think there were very small numbers of humans, even when the Anunnaki were here. There were still very small numbers, but the vast majority were taken off to Mars. So they really needed to safeguard the majority of the stock, and they could leave a few here.
So I have a really quick question here. This is
Yes.
interesting because my friend, you had mentioned seeing reptilians on Earth.
Right.
Now, in Pennsylvania, around Kinzu Dam area, one of my friends, saw something and lost like a couple hours of his time.
Right.
He saw a reptilian in a pool, jumping in and jumping out. He doesn't like, he'll remain unnamed, but he saw this, and then he lost a couple hours, like 2 hours of his life, where it's just like completely blank, dead space. Like I didn't even know I was there, and he got discovered by somebody else. Now I was just wondering if you could know or clue us in as to what that might be in this area that's out there.
Okay, so that's very different. There's he's got a very good following actually. There's a guy called Ken Bakeman, and he writes about his experiences with the reptilians. I would recommend your friend seek him out. You'll find his depictions all over the internet. His legendary depictions of the various types of reptilian and other entities. But he's also some of his writings. He's written a book which is available on. I have a feeling it's on Amazon, but if you do a search for Ken Bakeman book, I'm sure you'll find it. He's actually apparently rewriting it when I last spoke to him. So I don't know what's going on that front. Now, that is not. He's moved into I call it the twilight zone, where you're moving outside our dimensional frame. So the reptilians, the bulk stock, have actually ascended, but there is an overlap. So some of them who've not progressed spiritually as much as the others are still, I'll call them proto-physical. I think you could probably touch and feel them physically. They have been seen physically. I'm not sure anybody's got to touching them. That's the thing. So I'm not sure whether they are actually physical or whether they just appear to be physical.
All right. So I have a question on that too. This leads to another question, which is, if something were to send a projection of themselves, how physical could that be?
It isn't. So the reptilians, they're colloquially known as chameleons, which have a reputation for sorcery, are famous for their holograms. So they're able to project holograms of either their own image or other, basically any image they want. And they sometimes appear to abductees as Jesus. Even Elvis Presley apparently has appeared to abductees, which is one of their less used personas. So they use some kind of holographic generation device, and looks perfect, except it just doesn't, in a sense, but energetically, to anybody who's spiritually superior, who has their third eye switched on, the energy is wrong. It just doesn't feel right. But to the eye, it looks absolutely spot on. It looks real.
Can they physically or energetically interact with you?
They can physically interact with you, but you move into Twilight Zone. So I don't know if they can react with you physically in conscious state. So
I think they can, because I've literally, this is what I was doing. I was eating a bowl of miso soup, and I had
as
some
one
soup in
does.
my mouth. I had some soup in my mouth and slam right on the back, like it was like somebody had stepped into the room and then smacked me on the back, and I spit my soup everywhere. And I was just like, what was happening? And the only other being in the room should have been my cat. Instead, there was a projection of a dragoness, if you will, and she was
Yes.
like, I need you to draw me. And I'm like, I'm trying to eat my soup here. Like, you just invaded my house. Like, and then
Yes.
she drugged me off to, compellingly, the bedroom later on after I drew her enough. Like, what the heck was that?
So you actually physically saw her, or you
I
you
can't
knew?
see. I can't use my vision, but I felt her and saw her in
Yeah,
my
yeah, yeah. All
my
right. So
imagination. My imagination, but she physically interacted with me. There's
no,
no doubt.
it's not your imagination. It's more than that. So there's a void in the physical. So that you see that is possible for someone who's had their third eye activated. You can physically interact, but you cannot. When I say physically interact, physically from your perspective, but metaphysically from the object perspective.
Okay.
But to physically interact, I'm saying, so the entity, you can essentially, if you could get to do it, you could touch and feel them in the room. You could hold her hand if she's got a hand. It's yeah, because some of them don't. If you could hold her hand, the only way you can do that is to flick over to either subconscious or superconscious state. So you cannot be conscious. So essentially, from anybody who saw you, you would be asleep. You
Yeah,
would be
that's
in a
weird because
trance.
I was definitely moving. Like, I was able to do it in the supra-conscious mode because, like, and it was just random out of the blue. This was years ago. Like, I was not expecting any of this that day. I was, like, working on stuff in my house. Like,
So I regularly, I won't say see, but experience entities visiting me.
yes.
I
Same
know
here,
they're
actually.
there. I have friends or acquaintances who can see entities. So I've had one acquaintance or friend visit me, and they said, "Oh, you've got two entities behind you, very tall."
Oh, interesting.
So many people can do that, but we're not talking about physically seeing them physically. We're seeing them in the third eye. That seeing something physically is a whole different kettle of fish, and that's what your friend experienced, where he saw a reptilian physically jumping into the pool and jumping out. The only way that is possible is if one had come up from the surface that is within our physical bandwidth range, on the cusp of our physical bandwidth range, and theoretically could interact with us physically. And I say theoretically because I find no evidence that any have interacted with us physically. Many have been seen, as in physically seen, but never been interacted with.
Well,
if that makes sense.
Recently, I saw something myself. Yes. I caught a glimpse of purple-skinned reptilian type thing with a tail, like very, very humanoid. But I only saw a glimpse, but then definitely was there. There was no doubt about it. And this is around my house, like, and I was just like, whoa, because like when I caught the glimpse of that, I was just like, oh, who are you?
Yes. So there, have you got any caves near within striking wrist distance of you?
Strikingly enough, there definitely are. It's not a very big cave system, but there's definitely some caves around here. We don't know where the rest of them are because there could be cave systems we don't know about.
Right. So one of those is obviously an entrance to their domain.
See, I figured they just came for me because I'm so I'm on the radar, so to speak.
Now, the other possibility is obviously you've known that there are spaceships that come and visit you regularly.
Well, okay, so here's the thing that happened with that, like recently, okay, like maybe 2 months ago at the most, I was driving into town and I had felt like half an hour before when I first started my way back from work that I might see a UFO. Well, I like literally was driving into town and like there was something in the clouds and it was literally decently sized and it was sitting there and I saw it coming down into town like just on the hill there and I was just like, whoa.
Yes.
There, and then later on, it came to check out my house, and
yes, there's a guy here called Damien Knott who has this ability, who he can just basically call the any. Well, I don't call them UFOs because they are identified, any alien craft, and he can just call them up. And to a degree, I have the same ability as well. Our break is coming.
Yeah, we'll discuss this later in a second.
Speak you soon.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
We did not engage in conflict that was out of line with our mission.
Is it disloyalty? Is it sedition? Is it treason to oppose the hands of tyranny? Never!
I will never send troops anywhere on a mission of that kind without telling them that if somebody shoots at them, they can darn well shoot back.
I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty! Oh, give me death!
A dark cloud is finally lifting across the world as U.S. military intelligence and their global partners are destroying the deep state criminal power structure that has ruled over our planet for hundreds of years.
We are free with the God-given right, and we shall not yield that right to any power on earth.
Hi, I'm Scott McKay. The world is at, and I am your host on The Tipping Point on Revolution Radio, where every Monday from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, we bring you the latest in this ensuing takedown of this global criminal empire.
That's an image of strength.
You'll get the raw, hard truth here on The Tipping Point, so come join us Mondays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern in Studio B at revolution.radio.
Be evasive.
But that doesn't mean that they're telling the truth as opposed to fiction.
And Genesis chapter 6 verse 4, and there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, indicating that there were giants before the Nephilim.
And sons of God, plural. They weren't talking about Jesus coming down.
No, that's right. Yeah.
I'm Steve Crawford, host of Factor Theory Live. Join me every Sunday night from 10 p.m. till midnight Eastern Standard Time on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Check it out.
This is Thomas, a.k.a. a Mad Painter. I'd like you to join me Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Open Canvas. Don't forget to bring an open mind.
Yes, folks, that's right. Bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. UFOs to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here. Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio! All right, thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Greetings and salutations once again. We're back on the air with Rising Reality after a short break.
Yeah,
so
good.
We were discussing not necessarily just UFOs, but alien craft in general, and being able to bring them to us or being able to communicate with them.
Yes, and just to clarify, with my experience, I don't know if I had been tipped off by them. I certainly didn't request it, but I knew when a craft would be outside. And so I just knew. So I'd go outside and I'd say, oh, yeah, there it is. And then I stopped doing that. So, yes.
Like I had one arrive over top of my workplace. And it felt like they beamed someone there. And then this individual was extremely powerful. Like I felt this energy shift in the room. This individual was like whatever. I couldn't see her, but I could feel the difference in the room. And like literally, like I had to go to the bathroom at McDonald's to bow to this one because that was how important she was. It made I didn't want to be in front of everybody. And then summarily the energy form stepped into me. So I melded with me, and like that has been happening. Like I've had a lot of them do this to me.
Yes, yeah.
Not the same fanfare, but like that is something different. And then yesterday, or not yesterday, but last week when you mentioned the tall whites. One of them literally just did that to me right then and there. Like when we were on the air, like one of them like sent a tall white, like sent a projection to me, and in that projection summarily jumped right into my energy field.
Yes, wow. I think they use that to read you in a sense. I think that's going on. It can be many things happening with that. There are many prognoses. Some of them are very bad. You don't want that to happen. So, for instance, I woke up. I was lying down doing my meditation thing that I've talked to you about, finding my core, and something coughed that wasn't me. Mm-hmm. I said, hang on, what's going on here? What's going on? That wasn't me. So whatever was inside me made a mistake, and I ejected it. So I won't say I ejected it, but I was aware of it, and I said, "You're separate from me, so you're not having any influence over me at all." And then it disappeared. So, and I felt it. I actually felt its body because you presumably must have been able to. Were you able to feel the tall white? Were you able to feel what they were about?
Well, it just depends. I can't see anything, so I can only feel the energy. So therefore, usually what happens is they step over to me and they just basically want to get in. And I'm just like, okay, fine. You can check my homework, and then that's basically
All
where
right.
it
Well,
goes. And then after
when
that,
you
usually
when
the
you
energy doesn't like leave right away, but like the energy I could pick it out if I want to. But usually it's a learning experience between me and
okay.
whoever's doing that.
All right. Well, when you find your core, and we've discussed this before, when you find your core, you will be able to. They won't just integrate to you. You can integrate to them. So you can be the tall white. You can feel what they feel. You can become the tall white when that
Okay,
happens.
so
So
that that
that's
actually
it.
this actually has happened, although it's
Right.
weird for me on this end because what happens is once they share with me, I just jump right in with them too on their end, and then
Okay.
that makes things weird. But at the same time, like I have to stay focused here. It's very
Yes.
important to them. I stay more focused here than to really
All right.
know
So
what's going on. I
you're
just get
50%.
glimpses.
You're 50% of the way there to finding your core. You will eventually, when you find it, you'll actually be able to detach that side of you and carry on a normal life. It is, your whole perspective will change. As I've said to you before, it's like I'm looking out from my body, from my eyes. I'm no longer there all the time, 100% of the time. It's like my body is, I'm an automaton in a sense, that I'm the life force. Yeah, I'm looking out from this body. What the hell's this? Um, but it's now become normal to me, so I'm used to it. And that will happen with you when you find your core. And then you can detach that aspect of you into any invader, and you can just do what they do to you. You can find out what they're all about. Well, what we were talking about, we were talking
Huh.
about. That's right. Your them coming to you, and you, and one came down. Well, you see, I go to them. So I looked at one craft, and I was interested to know what was inside. So I went up, and there was a very large entity, a very long legs. I remember that sitting in the cockpit, which seemed very small. But I recall it was the light was dazzling. It was just extraordinary in there. I don't know how you could do anything. You'd be blinded by it. But no, it was it was all good. That's the way it was. And the entity, I couldn't see its face, but it put its thumb up, to say everything's great to me.
Huh. Wow. Really long legs. I don't know that one, but that sounds really interesting.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I've had some,
So
and these, like, some of my experiences are from years ago, but other ones, like, especially recently, things have, like, sped up, like, extremely much. Like, I don't get left alone much.
yes. So to just go back to your friend and to fully answer that. So the reason of the missing time hints that he's moved into a different dimension. And those 2 hours that were missing actually translate, you multiply that for 10, 20 times in the next jump up. So 1 hour of our time is 20 hours of their time. So if he's been gone he's actually had 2 days with whatever the entity was. And the entity was
Wow.
obviously there to visit him, to take him, and for him to experience. And if he goes and there's a lady here in Australia who does regression. She's very, very good. She specializes in those kind of alien interventions. Name of Mary Rodwell, Rodwell, and she can actually regress him and find out. He can actually learn the full period. He will be able to remember the full period if all goes well. But he can use, there are other regressors in the United States. If he does a web search, he'll find someone to help him.
Interesting. I have a friend who does some CV therapy, so that's really good.
Okay.
They actually gave me somebody. So my good friends who I just saw, like I haven't seen them. Remember I told you about that crazy life transforming trip that I took, like 2017.
Yes.
Well, the same people that gave me the hug that brought me like into some semblance of reality after that, they
Yes.
gave me like a 7-string guitar and
You mentioned that.
some other things when I was out there, and I just got back like from this whole trip. But my one friend does some good regression type therapy, so I think I will try to use her with that too myself to try to figure out some of the things that bugging me.
Okay, well that's good.
Especially past lives, because I want to look into. We'll segue back into Atlantis here.
The only thing is, I'll say this just for you and also the viewers, that there are different types of regressive practices. So different types of regression. So some do therapeutic regression, some do real life regression, so your past lives, and others do the more moving into the extra dimensional field, where moving into that spiritual regression. So it's actually quite complex.
Yes.
So I just wanted to clear that up. But it's all good. So you have to find out really what the regressor does, where they're going to take you. That's an important first step to find out. So, and there are a lot
I was just gonna say I have a couple of past lives I really want to dig into, because there's been some really periods of time for me, and I'm still healing from that, because I went and did what you said not to do. Which I didn't get lost. I didn't lose this lifetime, you see. But what I did was I was crying into my coffee pot, and I had a very clear mind at the time. But what I was trying to figure out was like what was wrong, and my ancestor chain jumped up into me, like, and each one of them unified in true love, except for me, because I still hate myself. So like that was really weird. And I was crying in my coffee pot, and like I could feel them come into me and just turn on as soon as like it happened. It was almost like a whole bunch of past lives just came up into me, and it was just really weird.
Yes.
I've never experienced such a thing before.
Yes, because, and I said to you that obviously, and anybody else who goes down that path, I do not recommend it. That this is your new life. This is your new life.
It's weird. It's weird because like I didn't ask for it. You had warned me. I was not trying to attempt to do that. They did it of their own accord.
Well, I did, because you were looking for the core and you looked in the wrong place.
Well, I wasn't looking for my core that morning. I was just trying to get some like self-love, and then I had all this stuff happen to me, and I was like, now I have even more. Now I had even more karma to work on, and I was like, this will be fun.
Yes, interesting.
This will be fun.
All interesting. So, yes. So shall I continue with I think we've pretty much covered that, unless there's any other aspects that I haven't answered.
No, I think we should segue back into Atlantis, because then we can start talking about all the other stuff that we haven't about Atlantis.
So let's go to Atlantis on Earth. And I mentioned that the Syrians did an excursion really to find out whether it would be safe to live on Earth when the Anunnaki had left, because the Syrians are an Anunnaki asset. They just know when the time is right, so they would have known that the Anunnaki had ascended, so they did come to Earth, and the Anunnaki, because they're not physical, they live in weather systems, had engaged Lemurians as Earth protectors. So the Lemurians operated for the interests of the Anunnaki. And obviously, we've got the famous continent of Mu, M-U, which is well known in esoteric circles, and Lemuria. Lemuria was obviously the big city that was megacity complex that was Lemurian governed. So that was the Lemurian heart, which is actually now under in the deep trough, which is under the Pacific Ocean.
There's actually
Now,
I've done some studying on that myself. Keep going.
well, I'll just very briefly say that there was another comet incident that came towards Earth, and Saint Germain described it in his writings. He called it the end of Atlantis, but it wasn't. It was actually the end of Lemuria, and the Lemurians had this tractor beam where they tried to deflect the comet using this tractor beam, but they messed it up and they fumbled the comet, and the comet split in two, and it just continued, and there was nothing they could do after that. It was just continued to heading towards Earth. And according to Saint Germain, it was 12 times as bright as the sun. So it must have been a huge spectacle. And so it carried on, and it obviously struck Earth. And unfortunately, it struck the megacity complex and caused two huge dents and a great crater out of that. And then that crater at some point filled up with water, which is now the Pacific Ocean. And that all happened 24,000 years ago, or actually more. Actually, it was 24,000, so it would have been 22,000 BC. So 24,000 years ago. And that was the end of the Lemurian stranglehold, if we can call it that, of Earth. So what happened was the Lemurians could have turned against the Syrians, because the Syrians were, at this stage, devout enemies of the Anunnaki. I'll explain why on another show, because we'll never get through Atlantis otherwise. There's a lot to obviously to talk about. So anyway, so the Syrians were welcomed by the Lemurians, and the Lemurians who lived at that stage on the equatorial regions of Earth, but they did have a complex which is known as the ancient Rainbow City, which is located, or was located, where we know what in the region we now called Antarctica. It wasn't called that then; it was called something else. That region, and if you look at the ancient maps, it begins with C. I forget the name of the place, but on the ancient maps, it's not Capernia, but it's something like that.
Interesting. Well, is that the place where the remnants of the Nazis went to?
Yes, they were looking for they knew all about the Rainbow City. That's what they were looking for, and I think they found it.
The Rainbow City you're saying was from Mu and not from Atlantis, right? Leftovers.
No, that was another. It's a supplementary complex that was a Lemurian settlement, but it wasn't. It was away from Lemuria. Lemuria, as I said, was in the Pacific region, because they occupied that band, the equatorial regions, and just a band up, maybe from the tropics today. So the Tropic of Capricorn downwards, is that the northern one, or is that the southern one? So anyway, between the tropics and the equator, so they occupied that space on Earth. But they also had other little pockets, civilization pockets, and the big one was the Rainbow City. So ultimately, that northern Africa region where Egypt is today, when the Syrians came, the Lemurians gave the entire northern hemisphere, what is the northern hemisphere, all the way up to the Arctic Circle and back down. That was given to the Syrians. So that became Atlantis. The entire northern hemisphere was Atlantis. And to mark the occasion, the Lemurians and Syrians did a joint venture project which is known as the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Yes.
So the Lemurians, if you look at those breeze blocks at the bottom, you see them all over the world. You see them on Easter Island, the same breeze block structures, support foundation structures. You see them in Peru. You see them all over the world. That's Lemurian architecture. So the foundations of the Great Pyramid were created by the Lemurians, and the Syrians built the pyramids, and that's why the pyramids are all over bloody Mars, because that's what they used. And you find pyramids all over this planet as well. I think that the Syrians didn't necessarily create the pyramids, the Mayan pyramids, and other and Chinese pyramids, but their architecture, their methodology is being used by other entity groups that borrow that and use their style of doing it. And of course, we know that pyramids far in the middle are power stations. That's a primary fundamental use of the pyramid.
Huh. I have heard that there has been war on this particular planet for like 52 million years, and that many of the pyramids are basically spiritual fortifications that over like at least seven different massive fortifications where the light and the dark would come to this planet and like see the other one wiped out on the surface and then start something new. And so what you're describing at the most is like, our very recent history as opposed to all the rest of it that we don't have any clue about.
Yeah, so there are some very ancient pyramids, but they're not pyramid shaped, if that makes sense. They are energy generators. The classic are the so-called Bosnian pyramids, which aren't pyramid looking at all. They're not pyramid like at all, but they are energy generators.
That's
so
very
I would and I would date those Bosnian pyramids were very ancient. They're millions of years old.
Really?
Yeah, they're very, very, very ancient. There are some in the UK as well. They're similar things. They've got these mounds that have things inside that are very, very ancient. I think that's why the Jews went there. That's why they made a beeline to their promised land, because they knew they had power. They knew it was already there. All they had to do was activate it.
Yeah.
So a lot of these structures, so for instance, the Greek ruins, they weren't created by the Greeks. They're ancient Atlantis structures.
Yes. I remember we started glossing over this last episode.
We did.
But it'd be better to go into it now, especially because then you can talk about how big the base of Atlantis was, like how big of a civilization it is. You can go into that now.
Well, essentially, the key thing to talk about really with Atlantis is, and this is associated with the fall, so the Anunnaki, one of the things, when the Anunnaki were present on the surface, the reptilians never came up because they knew they'd get decimated.
Okay.
They couldn't. They wouldn't risk it. They knew damn well it was too dangerous for them. Because if the Anunnaki sensed them, they would just obliterate them. Because and this is hinted at in the Babylonian text with the Enki and Enlil. They call them Anunnaki. They're not. They're Baal manifests, by the way. They're not Anunnaki, Enki and Enlil. But according to the Babylonian text, they're Anunnaki. This isn't true. Although it is true in a sense, because Baal are simply representations of the Anunnaki. So in a sense, it is true, but it isn't true, because they are the next level down. So when Enki tried to conquer by Inanna, his paternal granddaughter, he essentially supported her and funded her and produced all these entity types for her to take on the war against the reptilians inside Earth. And of course, as the tale goes, she failed. They captured her and they chopped her up. That's how the Babylonian texts present it. And so then they sealed off, and it sealed off the inner world. So nobody could go there. And what he wanted to do was unify the entire planet. So the inner and the outer are one, but they couldn't, so they just sealed off. So from that point on, the Anunnaki were at bitter war with the reptilians inside Earth. And so the reptilians couldn't go up at all. But obviously rumors had got to them, and they knew that the Anunnaki was left. And eventually they plucked up the courage to go up to the surface. And this happened about 20,000 years ago. And there is an African witch doctor today who's been interviewed. I've forgotten his name. He's interviewed by David Icke, who talked about an entity group called the Chitahuri.
The Chitahuri?
Yeah, so Chi, Ta, Hu, Ri.
Chitahuri.
So Chi is your life force. Okay. You know what the Chi is?
Yes.
It's a spark of life, but it's actually also the individuality, and it represents the individuality of God. So every single life is an individual expression of God.
Yes.
Ta is known as God's sin, so it's skin. So Ta is actually traits of God. So we've got the individual expression of God, traits of God. So Chi, Ta, Hu, well, we've got Human. Human was created by Hu Gadam. So Hu is the creator, the great creator God.
Huh.
So we've got Chi, Ta, Hu. Ri is, well, the best example would be Ri-A, which is now known as Ra. So Ri is the spirit of God. Oh, we've got a break coming up.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
I will defend myself against their tyranny. Number 3 is my radio broadcast. I'm squarely in front of the public all the time, and they all know what's going on.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
Hello, my name is John Wayne, and I do a broadcast here at freedomslips.com, revolution.radio, called The Unequivocal Truth, DEFCON 1.
Freedom and fear are at war.
And folks, I assure you, we are in Defense Condition 1. As we journey perilously through this paradigm that we currently reside in, and I ask that you join me every Saturday, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for The Unequivocal Truth, DEFCON 1.
We shall never surrender.
I want to thank everybody for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the one place where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio.
All right, let's show them what we got now.
travels to Earth through the rainbow crystal bubbles from the furthest reaches of space and time, across the dimensions, through the elements, and in harmony with the colors of the universe. Through her mastery of abstract stream of consciousness malapropisms, she weaves a web of comic, satiric, cosmic conversation. Her subjects can range from Norman, the goose next door, to astrology and earth changes, and into the deep recesses of the soul matrix. She holds a wealth of knowledge on herbs, plants, and astrology. Join Mona and her guests on adventures of a feral hippie as she touches the earthly radio waves 5 days a week at 2 p.m. Monday to Friday on Studio B at Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio! The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And we're back for more.
Right.
We were talking about the word breakdown. I was going to say etymology, but I can't even say the word.
The word Chitahuri.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. So I just gave you the purpose behind that. So I'm just saying that it's a valid term. There's another word that's used for reptile called siakar, but one of my students actually suggested it was a mispronunciation of chakra. So when information is channeled, it doesn't always come through very clearly. So somebody listened to that and thought they were trying to say chakra, but they heard it as siakar. And that's because the reptilians travel through the chakra points in the body. That's how they can come through you. But
I've had a very strange feeling about that. I'll tell you what, you just confirmed something for me, because I've had this really strange thought that I became a very important projector point. So in other words, they can send energy to me, and then I can send out projections that are like real.
Yes. Well, that would make sense. So I just need to clear up a slight error I made before. I was saying about the reptilians were concerned about the Anunnaki. That isn't actually entirely true. They were more concerned about the Lemurians, because the Lemurians had actually, the reptilians used to live on Earth. They lived on Earth for millions of years. The Lyran government, and then there was a big war between the Lemurians and the Lyrans, and the Lyrans lost. And they ended up going into the planet 750,000 years ago, and that's where they stayed. And so that's the reason they must have heard of the fall of Lemuria. They knew Lemurians were still on the planet, but in much smaller numbers. And they obviously waited a few thousand years, and they thought it was safe enough to come up. And they caused a lot of problems. So Africa at this point, there was still a band of water. The north of Africa, so the Egyptian region, was very wet, but there was land there. But there was a band of water separating Africa. So Africa was still an island, the southern part of Africa at this stage, and separated from the rest of all other land. And so the reptilians came up and they caused havoc, because they basically possessed the natives, welcomed them, and they possessed the natives eventually, and they turned them into zombies. And so there was a big problem with the reptilians and this witch doctor who used to speak with David Icke explain what went on. And so there was a character, actually was one of my incarnations, called Yoshana, but he's known as Hosanna today. He's actually he's mentioned in the Bible, praise Hosanna. Now you know who Hosanna was. He's a black man who lived about, 17,000 years ago. Sorry, I lied, almost 20,000 years ago, 19,000 years ago. He thwarted the reptilians in Africa, and he gave the natives their sovereignty again. Nevertheless, the Syrians. Going back to the topology of Earth, at this stage, there was no ice. There was no Arctic Circle. There was no ice at all. So the idea of an ice age is nonsense. There was no ice age. There has never been an ice age. It's all nonsense. And science just looks at symptoms and says, oh, well, how can we explain the Arctic ice? Well, that must have been caused by an ice age, but there was no ice age. The actual Arctic ice, how that was caused, I'll explain later, presuming we have the time. So there was no ice where the Arctic Circle is today. There was just barren land. But there were cave systems which became the entrance, big cave systems, which came to the entrance, to a corridor which runs all the way through Earth. So it's literally, it's like the Earth's core. It's like it's been an apple that's been decored. You can actually walk to the extent you can just go through the various layers of Earth. Not that you'd probably want to.
You never know what you might encounter.
Well, there'd be problems doing that, but I mean, you could theoretically if you wanted to. Although it's all changed apparently now, but it was actually open at that stage where there was an access point. You could just basically go through the various layers of Earth, and there are 5 continental shelves inside Earth. So ultimately, there is more land mass area inside Earth by a mile than on the surface.
Yes, and see, everybody talks about, we have to depopulate or we'll have too many people. No, not at all. And then you got to talk about the fact that the Earth could expand to hold more people, because that's right. That's what a planet does. Like, planets aren't necessarily dead things; they're alive.
That's it. In fact, as David Icke rightly speculates, planets are actually designed for internal habitation. It makes no sense to live on the surface because they are giant air conditioning systems, and that's why you've got a polar region at one end and you've got a volcanic region at the other. If you look at air conditioning systems, they've got heat at one end and refrigeration at the other.
Huh.
That's how it works. So our planet is a giant air conditioning system to support internal life systems. So anyway, about 18,000 years ago, the Syrians made an excursion into the planet and brokered relations with the reptilians. And they then together built a mega complex in the Arctic Circle region, which became known as Atlantis. So that is the Atlantis that Plato, for instance, was talking about. He wasn't talking about the other stuff. He was talking about the technology city, which is also known as Babel.
Aha.
Now, I mentioned another term, Baal, earlier. So the bar of Baal, means praise or bless.
Okay.
Al, as in Allah, or El, Al is a variation of El, or all from Almighty. So El, actually, if you think about God, if you think about the extent of God, God is everything. It's the entire. It's everything, including nothing. So God is all. So Al, Baal, is bless all or bless God. But the Syrian Bel is not a shortened version of Baal. Bel is a separate entity. So Bel is, in fact, their way of saying omnipresent God. So El obviously is all. When you put a B actually is like the to exude, to perspire, So a God perspiring. So it is their way of saying omnipresence. So they called their city Bel, which is bless omnipresent God. So the whole idea of Gnosticism and the idea that God is sown into nature stems from Atlantis, which is fantastic. So Gnosticism is Atlantis. That the root of Gnosticism is Atlantis. This the idea of a pantheism. The entwined nature and God is, and the only way you can experience God is through celebration of nature, and harvest is very much this Atlantis Syrian model, and that's why it was called Barbel.
And the fall of Atlantis is kind of like the Tower of Babel, basically.
It was the fall of Babel, and that's why. So in actual fact, in that it was a technology city. It had special security. You couldn't get into it unless you were invited or welcome. And the whole idea of banishment, you might have heard of that, banishment from the city, stems right back to those days. That as a punishment, there were two punishments. You could be put to death or banished. There was no other. You weren't put in prison. There were no prisons. You were put to death or banished. That was your two options from Babel or Babel. And
those
so
those are pretty stark options there. You either live, get out, or you fucking die. I mean, sorry, I shouldn't.
Well, actually, some I think might have preferred death, because banishment, you were sent out into the wilderness. So if you read the Genesis, the wilderness years, we know what that was talking about. Well, these were the guys that had been ejected from Atlantis. They'd done something wrong, so they were stuck in the wilderness. It was tough living.
Yeah.
So it talks again about the fall of Babel in biblical Genesis, and man no longer being able to communicate with each other. And the reason for that is there was a common language at Atlantis. There was only one language, but many different scripts to represent the language. But if you talk to somebody, whether they were Chinese or Ethiopian or from Denmark, everybody understood because the language was the same.
As opposed to now, which is all just a bunch of
Well, I think I might have touched on that last show, that obviously we've seen in Australia, Pidgin English is now in 50 years has morphed into an unrecognizable language, a dialect.
Unfortunate.
And that's what happened.
Yeah.
People changed words slightly, words became sloppily pronounced, they found new words, there were things that weren't ever talked about in Atlantis. You didn't need to talk about those, that outside Atlantis you did. So a whole range of new words have been discovered. We see that with the technology age. We've got computers. What are they? You wouldn't need to, if we went back 200 years and you mentioned the term computer, nobody would know what you were talking about, because there was no necessity for it, because they didn't have computers then.
Yeah. And then they were better off without them. Huh.
Possibly. Although, in fact, if we went back thousands of years, they did have technologies, but they were natural technologies.
Yes.
And, of course, the knowledge of how to use them has been lost. That's why they're not used today.
We have talked about stone technology before.
They are,
not on the
and that's what
show.
they were.
Like there literal like tablets that were made of stone could literally boot up like a computer, and they did things.
Right, correct. But they required mind power.
Now, I wonder if humans of today can learn how to use those technologies.
They can. They can all come back. We have to be able to commune. And if you notice, that's the reason the cabal does everything to stop us communing.
Yes.
We can't come together. We have to follow their order. They dictate to us. They tell us what to do, what we can and can't do.
This is why
we're like little children.
Yeah. Well, technically, I think they're the children.
Well, we can bitch as much as we like, but ultimately that's what's happened. And our education system, I've actually in my latest article, I've highlighted that it's there to break logic, so people can't apply logic anymore. They can't look at things. They have to rely on their sources.
Yes.
And that isn't
basically they try to keep you from learning that you spiritually can connect to anything, and therefore you could know anything. So that dispels their entire illusion, which is their illusion.
The word is a very important one. I see how they get you. It blocks out of my mind, but it's very important. They rely on influences. We now rely on influences and influencers. We have no logic. Well, I have logic. I apply logic. People read my articles and say, what on earth is all that? Because they can't apply logic. So they rely on influences and influencers. And the influences and influencers are the cabal. I listen to obviously in the break, they talk about, we're fighting, we'll stand up for freedom, we've got the military. The military bloody machine we have today is the cabal.
Yes.
Your military is the cabal. They're a group of zombies. They call themselves some soldiers. They wouldn't know valor if they tripped over it, half of them.
I mean, that's a sad
thing. It's a festering, corrupt mess. That's what the military is.
I mean, as far back as Eisenhower was warning us about what it was going to become and what it really was then, and it still is today. Like, there's no difference. Like, there's always this talk about the white hat saving us. I don't believe it. I think that, we're in for a rough ride for the next couple of years.
The only thing that will save humanity is if humanity is prepared to lose its life for its sovereignty. And everyone has to stand up and say, no, kill me if you wish, but I'm not going to comply. Down tools, simultaneously, bang, kill us all. Then the cabal is forced to negotiate.
I feel like I've stood up. I'm waiting for everybody else to stand up, but I'm ready. I'm ready to kick some butt or take some names in response to what they've been doing on this stupid planet.
Yes. Well, I think there are a lot of people are, but it's still very small numbers compared to the whole.
Yes.
But I think that's going to change. I think the cabal know that their days are going to be numbered anyway.
I feel like they've turned into a freaking clown show. Honestly, I mean, if you just look at American politics for one, like a second, you see the clown show. Like, it's hilarious.
Well, it is. But that's going to change. That will change. It will reach peak, and it'll burn out.
I can't wait. Like, I just can't wait to see the politics in and of itself just be gone completely from our vocabulary.
And ultimately, we can now turn back and look at Atlantis. So the Atlantis model was grassroots governments.
Really?
So there were no laws. in Atlantis. There were only rules of thumb.
That's amazing, actually.
So we talk about our justice system, which isn't justice at all. It's actually a revenge system.
Yeah.
And you can see some very compelling arguments, and they say, oh, no, but that breaks the law. So you're guilty. You see how it's flawed?
Yes.
How can that be? It's compelling. Therefore, you're not guilty. You see, so under Atlantis justice, if it was compelling, you weren't guilty. Unless you were guilty.
Very interesting.
So,
well, that makes, I think, I've always thought that a grassroots system was exactly the way that it should be. I always thought that individually people were better off by themselves than they were as a group because it makes them stupid.
Right. So grassroots governance is represented symbolically by an inverted triangle, an equilateral triangle. So you've got the bulk at the top and you've got the point at the bottom.
Okay.
So that's your grassroots governance. But there's another form of governance in Atlantis, which is the spiritual governance. So there were two. There was political, which was done by the people, and there was a spiritual government which overlaid Atlantis, and that was run by the Syrians, although teachers were Pleiadians. Who also got involved in coordinating, I suppose you'll call them councils or grassroots movements, which were obviously essential to coordinate governance of the people. So everybody felt everything was fair. Everybody could coordinate well, unlike today. There were no disputes because everything was fair. So the spiritual governance obviously is administered by an authority, a small authority. So that's represented by an upright equilateral triangle. Now, if you put the two together, now where have I seen that before? Yeah, if you check out the Israel flag, and on that flag you'll see superimposed triangles, one which is top down,
and the other one is bottom up.
Right. And that heralds from Atlantis.
Interesting.
So that's the Star of David.
The plot thickens.
And we know that David was also a pharaoh. I forgot which pharaoh he was, but now we can come down to the crux of what I had intended to say, that Babylon was Atlantis.
Yes.
But the Syrians had gone by that stage. So Babylon was what was left of Atlantis.
Well, that makes sense, though.
And so there was a time.
Interesting how the powers that be, say Christianity, was always against Babylon.
Of course it was, because the Christians essentially were going back. The Christianity is actually not a version of Gnosticism. It was promoted by the Philistines.
Yeah.
And we know who thwarted the Philistines. It was David. The Philistines then settled in ancient Greece, and then they tried to conquer the world from ancient Greece. They were almost successful in doing that under Alexander the Great. It's interesting how they call their tyrants great. Catherine the Great, she was absolutely one of the worst tyrants. So we've got Alexander the Great, and obviously Aristotle as well. He was a very key player. He was one of Alexander's advisors. And And then when the Greeks' civilization, as they always do, the superpower struggle imploded, it fizzed out, and then they found a new foothold in Italy,
in Rome.
That's right. And then an interesting thing happened about 400 AD. Actually, it was before then. It was 300 and something AD. The Roman the empirical Roman Empire transferred its power to Christianity, and so from that point on, the Roman Emperor became the Pope. So the first popes were the Roman emperors, and they shifted power to Constantinople. And the reason they did that was because under one God, you couldn't depose an emperor. So what had happened before, that the emperors would champion particular gods, but if that god went out of flavor, you went out of flavor as the emperor, and you could get deposed, and which meant you got killed ultimately, because if you were still around, you were a threat. So by moving to an omnipresent God, you were safe, because you couldn't blame God for anything, because God was everything.
Yeah.
So that preceded safety, and obviously under Constantine. Oh, sorry, another break's coming up.
Yep.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Hey guys, Scorpio here. Join me every Saturday at 2 p.m. here on Studio A for the Scorpio Conspiracy Show, where we discuss the hidden agendas that impact our lives and uncover the secret societies and the shadowy elite who construct the reality that we are supposed to believe. So be there Saturdays, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, here on Studio A on Revolution Radio, and learn what's really going down.
Lost a little honey on the lone highway, left me for another on the lone highway. They killed Dirty Dog McGee on the lone highway.
Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, and you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Galactic Interstellar Council on Revolution Radio Studio A, Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Join us as we traverse the starseed paradigm. As as expressed in the time-space continuum that we know as the divine expression of love and light. Integrating this conscious unity into the galactic paradigm. So welcome all, both terrestrial beings and galactic beings as one. So be it. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
All right, thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
And we're live here. I was just outside for a second.
No worries.
So we were talking about, we were going to get back into Atlantis once again, because we were talking about the power struggle of the system here now and what its roots are.
Yes. Well, I think we can just finish what I was talking about. I mentioned, obviously, the Roman, because I think it's quite important, actually. The Roman then transferred its power to the papal see. The Roman emperors transferred power to the papal see, and that's how it's been ever since, and that's why the Catholic Church has such a huge influence over world affairs today.
Yeah, which is kind of sad. I don't really like the church very much.
Quintessentially, the United Nation philology is Catholicism. So the Israel administers fundamental law, but ethics are run by the United Nations. Ethics, I say, or corrupt ethics, rather. So anyway, obviously it's well known by the various synods that Constantine and then later his son and others almost fully transferred or fully rebadged Sol Invictus or sun worship, occultism, as Catholicism, and that's why Christmas is actually a winter celebration of winter solstice, and you can see all the other parallels to sun worship. The reason they have an altar is essentially a sacrificial altar in Catholicism. It links in with, so they basically, all they did was rebrand Sol Invictus, and so as far as Constantine and the hierarchy were concerned, it was a win-win. And that's why Christianity is nothing like Gnosticism.
Yes. Now, as a funny anecdote to that, I just want to say that the best way to get kicked out of the Catholic Church is to put a goldfish in the holy water.
Oh yes, I would have thought so. I think you piranha, you might really get them going. So so one of the interesting, a little side comment on that, which you may find interesting, or viewers may find interesting, is the god of culture, I suppose you'll call it, or arts and crafts, is Maverna, and also Athena is, in a sense, has a slightly wider catchment, but it was also the goddess of arts and crafts. But there's another god called Britannia, who is the god of arts and crafts and war, and that's the British god. So we have Athena presiding over the attempted takeover of the world by the Greeks. We have Maverna presiding over the Italian attempted takeover of the world. And then there's one more attempted takeover of the world, and that was the final one, was the British one, which presided over by Britannia, the same bloody God, because it's the same guys. It was the Philistines that were taking on the power all the time. So the British authority is the Philistine authority, if that makes sense.
Interesting.
And so the end, I laugh at this idea the cabal are still, you could topple the rubbish. The end of the domain of the cabal, the cabal seized power and have had power since the execution of Charles I, King of England, in 1649.
Yes.
So from 1650, the world was lost.
Yes. Which is what we're facing now.
Yeah, we're bang smacking that legacy. And the people have never stood up, other than some revolutions have taken, real ones. In Machiavellian revolution in England was one. There have been some other revolutions in Europe, but they never got anywhere. They've never lasted.
Yeah.
The people have always succumbed to tyranny, ultimately, because the people are weak, always have been.
Yeah. So that should segue us into the end of Atlantis, because we should talk about the death of their moon.
All right. Well, yes. Let's talk about that. So we'll, because I think this is the last segment. So yes. So Atlantis, the technology was set up. City was set up, which was a joint venture relationship between Syrian patriarchal spiritual power and the reptilians. And the reptilians were brought on as technologists. They have very, very good skills. But also they could create military devices. Theoretically, the Syrians can't do that.
That's interesting.
It goes against their ethos. Although the Syrians have been some of the most devastatingly aggressive, made some of the most devastatingly debilitating attacks the universe has ever seen.
Yes, and including destroying the Maldek, as we discussed in the last show.
That's right, and they've destroyed other planets, and they've really caused all sorts of problems. But they use that using different methods. But they tend to partner with other entity groups for that's the sort of more mundane style war initiatives. And in this case, they partner with reptilians who also do the laboratories for creating genetic laboratories and that sort of thing. So it was lots of things were happening. It wasn't just the war; it was other stuff as well. But so the reptilians did create war technologies or defense technologies, as we like to call them.
Huh.
Yeah. They're never useful. Yeah, right. No, so they created defense technologies. And at the time, there were, which we haven't discussed, there were on this planet physical entities. There were grey beings, which I believe herald from Zeta genus, and they became advisors of political advisors and also advisors to the kings. So the Lemurians use them because they have very great ancient wisdom. They remind me a little bit, of sort of in Star Wars, the Yoda reminds me. That character reminds me of these grey beings.
Huh. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yoda.
So
there's. Have you ever seen Stargate SG-1?
I have, yes.
Yeah, and they had the gray beings in there. The name of one of them was Thor, and
yes,
they had technology like Thor's hammer, and they were very interesting character species.
Well, Thor actually implies genetics, interestingly, rather than war. So, yeah.
Genetic.
So yes. So the Greys would advise the kings. Now, the Syrians are very upright, and they've got a very strong sense of values. And they also believe in you have to earn the right to knowledge. So they have a huge knowledge repository themselves, but they don't give it out unless you earn the right to knowledge. Whereas the Greys would sometimes give the kings knowledge that the Syrians wouldn't feel they had right to, and it would cause problems because the kings could do all sorts of stuff that they shouldn't. They abused that knowledge. So anyway, there was some incident. I haven't necessarily pinpointed it, but it was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, and it caused a massive rift between the Greys and the Syrians. And the Syrians went to war against them and expelled them from Earth. And apparently, according to the Vedic text, the Greys then harbored on an ice moon that used to travel around the Earth. So there were originally, we used to have 3 moons.
You want to go over those 3 moons really fast?
Yes, I will. So one moon was very far out. That was destroyed in the 102 to 120,000 BC cosmic war. That was a casualty on that. So that's gone.
Which one is that one?
The one that was a long way out from Earth, but used to rotate around our planet, and would have been very tiny, would have hardly been seen, might have been seen, almost looked like a star. So that was destroyed a long time ago, 100,000 years ago. Then we had 2 left. We've got our regular moon, which some claim is synthetic. I don't believe it is synthetic, but I think it's been adapted synthetically. And then we've got the other one, which was known as Phala, according to the Vedic text. Some call it other things. I have a feeling it's Marduk in the biblical text. In Isaiah, called it Marduk, which is sometimes confused. Yeah, confused with Marduk. But Marduk and Marduk are not the same. So Marduk, I think, is biblical Isaiah's description of that ancient moon, which is known as Phala in the Vedic text. So anyway, according to the Vedas, the Greys sought residence on this little ice moon, which actually looked bigger because it was a lot closer to the Earth than our one is today. So that's one of the anomalies. So it looked bigger, but it was much smaller. So anyway, the Greys found residence on that. And apparently the Syrians, well, obviously they got wind of it, otherwise it wouldn't be in the Vedic texts. So they decided they needed to finally finish off the Greys and get rid of the problem. So they enlisted the help of the reptilians, and they decided from the technology city they would blast the moon with a tractor beam. It's typical Star Wars stuff. Now, ironically, I don't know whether this is karma. So the orbit of that small moon had a strange orbit around Earth that wasn't even. And at its closest point, it was only something like 500,000 miles away from Earth. Very close, almost touched Earth. Or maybe it was 500 million. I can't remember the figure. I've been given the figure, but it was enough where if you compare to our moon, it was like 1% of the different distance it is to the current moon.
Wow.
So it was really close. And that point happened to be hovering over the technology city.
That spells for failure of massive proportions.
So obviously the Syrians waited for the moon to line up over their city at that closest point, which is ideal for them, so they could use their tractor beam, and that's what happened. So they used the tractor beam on to obliterate this moon. But unfortunately, as with all karmic nastiness, they messed it up.
Yeah.
So they only shattered 50% of the moon. But because that ruined the equilibrium, so the moon fell out of orbit because of that event. The half of the moon fell out. And where do you think it came? It came tumbling down to the closest point on Earth, which was the technology city. So that got flattened, and that became the Arctic ice. So the remnant of that moon became the Arctic ice. But the rest of the moon sprayed all over the northern hemisphere. I say the northern hemisphere, ironically, it was the southern hemisphere. So I've been using northern hemisphere, but it would have been the southern hemisphere at that point.
Wow. That's how much the Earth is flipped.
No, the world actually, the Earth's core detached from the crust briefly about 2,000 years after that event. It took a long time for it to detach. And then the Earth's crust slipped a full 180 degrees and then snapped back into position.
Wow.
So what actually happened is that the northern hemisphere was sprayed with ice and it froze everything within reach of the Arctic Circle. And that's why in Russia, even today, Siberia, mammoths are still dug up.
Yep, because of the snap freezing of Vala whenever it was destroyed.
And they say, they've not just found, and they say mammoths, became extinct. Nonsense. They became extinct due to, the species evolved. Nonsense. They've actually dug up mammoths with literally still chewing food. They've got berries in their mouths. It hasn't gone from the mouth down. They haven't had a chance to swallow it. That's how quick the event happened.
Yeah.
So the ice came down and went wham. They were snap frozen, literally on the spot.
See, that's always bugged me because they kept saying, "Oh, it took millions of years," but then there was an ice age, and somehow it was so fast that the mammoths all were snap frozen. And I'm thinking to myself, there has to have been a bigger event that would have caused such a thing.
Yeah,
and
so there was no.
It's the destruction of Atlantis that caused it.
There was no ice age.
Yep.
However, there would have been ice, or there would have been polar or glacial regions of Antarctica, because that's the natural thing, but not to the extent it is today. It would have just been glacial. That's all. So what happened? What an effect of the geothermal effect of the Arctic Circle is? It caused glacial buildup in Antarctica that went out of control, and it's still going out of control. It's growing even today. That's why the scientists are down there trying to work out how the hell to stop it. And the Arctic Circle, of course, we know is receding today.
Yes.
Because it's going back to where it was.
See, very interesting.
So that explains Atlantis submerged by water. When Plato, and that comes from Plato, by the way, it's submerged by water. It's actually submerged by ice, which is solid water.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of people actually knew the full extent of what had happened, or the fact that there was no real ice age.
No, because they don't apply logic. They rely on, as I said, influences. So the influence is Plato. Oh, well, Plato said that happened, so it must be true. Because he's an influence, he's an influencer. And again, he was one of the key guys, the key guys that supported the Philistines when they were set up in Rome, in the Roman Empire. And he's told the truth, he's just distorted it a little bit.
Yeah. Sounds like just about everything there is nowadays, it's all distorted.
It is, because, again, we all rely on certainly academia relies at the root, at the core. This is why we review symptoms. Everything is based on symptoms. Are influences. So there are clinical symptoms which are unmovable, that science refuses to move from, and then theories, which either define or justify those symptoms. What we don't have is truth, and I call it pristine wisdom based on logic that pertains from truth. There's none of that. Truth is obsolete. It may occur here and there. There might be glimpses of it in a spot here, a spot there, but truth is obsolete. We have no truth. We only have influences.
Yeah. Those influences determine how much truth they give you at a certain time.
Well, it determines the direction of knowledge.
So what would you say to those people who have grown up listening to that? Or how about this? What would you say to the people that even use the universal system that they put on us? Like, say, go to the school and go to an actual school and get a doctorate, for example. Like, how do you start to unlearn what it is they taught you, but still use some of the knowledge?
You come up with the word. You end up having to unlearn what they've taught you. You demystify.
Yeah.
So none of the information you've got is any use at all. Well, other than the fact you have a repository you can draw on of information that you can then rephrase and reframe, and so it's useful in that respect. You actually have a base that you can draw from. You just can't rely on it. You realize the influences are all corrupt, or mostly corrupt. And we know there are many different ways of doing things.
Yeah.
So we can now celebrate electricity down a wire. It's a very dangerous and very ineffective method of distribution, very polluting method of distribution, hence coronavirus.
Yeah.
But which has theoretically been around since 1918. It's only just been recognized now. It never caused a problem in between 1918 and 2019, but now it's an issue. So yes, there are these things work in a sort of troglodyte Neanderthal fashion. But if you want pristine, the best way of doing things, it's always going to be different to what we have now. And that's why ancient technologies are nothing like anything we have today.
Yeah. Completely different. Like, it doesn't, like we said, like stone, for example, can be an electric device. I'm pretty sure the emerald tablets are themselves stone tablets.
They used to use crystals a lot because crystals you can channel energy through them.
Yeah.
And so with communion, you can actually link up. Humans can link up, and you can channel very, very large amounts of energy and do incredible things with that. So we've got the famous Greek monument, the Pantheon, which was not created. That's Atlantis heritage. The Pantheon, which is actually means bridge to God.
Yeah, I mean that
was actually.
Yeah, you bring it out.
Was one of the effects of communion, where you congregated there, and the reason we have hymns, when you go to church, you sing hymns. Of course, the knowledge is lost; they don't know why. But these hymns were sung at particular frequencies, and that was very important to trigger. You sing at particular frequencies, you can then tap into a particular powers, inherent powers.
Yes. And that was the original purpose behind it. It was and right. They do that. That's coming from Atlantis too, isn't it? Because they used technology and crystal technology in order to heal people. They were doing serious work on that.
You sort of said it earlier. Are we coming to the end? I think
yes, we're coming to the end. We're already done. Steve, it has been a great show. Sorry about that.
That's okay. We need more to talk about this. I think we'll have to do another one.
I think so. I think we should definitely do that next week.
Thank you for listening to Revolution